Post-war USA, 1946. Following the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the fearful age of the Cold War had just begun, with tensions building with the Soviet Union, who now had atomic capabilities. There was a real fear of world-ending fighting if given enough friction. Millions of soldiers returned home from the bloody conflict that was World War II, many struggling to readjust to civilian life. Through the eyes of many fresh veterans, much of the happy-go-lucky American image had been shattered after spending years abroad, witnessing horrors that the human eye should never see. This is partially why we see the rise of dark detective film noir, depicting a world of violence and corruption, a reflective vision of a change in perspectives, fit for one of those movies further down south. A very real, very terrifying story would play out in similar fashion. Some might be familiar with the 1976 horror film called The Town That Dreaded Sundown, which chronicles a mass killer who sets a small town on edge with a horrific series of murders. In fact, since 2003, it's been screened yearly by Texarkana Parks and Recreation. It's presented a bit more fictionalized for audiences, but the subject matter of which it's based was very much real. From February to May of 1946, a ghastly string of killings haunted Texarkana in a way that would strike fear into the area due to their exceptional brutality. Similar to the Zodiac killings on the West Coast decades later, the Moonlight murderer had a fondness for preying on victims who frequented lovers' lanes. 11:45 p.m., Friday, February 22, 1946. 25-year-old Jimmy Hollis and his 19-year-old girlfriend, Jean Larry, finish seeing a movie together in town and decide to end the night on the Texarkana outskirts, presently where the Central Mall is located. It was a tucked-away spot for the couple, or at least that's what they thought. After 10 minutes there, a man approached the car holding a flashlight and wearing a sack over his head with eye holes cut out. He approached the driver's side window where Jimmy was and flashed him with the light. Perhaps thinking the man confused him with another, Jimmy tried to tell the masked man he had the wrong guy, to which the man replied, quote, "I don't want to kill you, fellow, so do what I say." With that, Jimmy and Jean were ordered out of the car, now under the stranger's mercy. The man told Jimmy to take off his pants, and when he did, he was struck in the head with a gun twice, knocking him out. Jean did her best to defuse the situation by grabbing her boyfriend's wallet and showing the assailant that it was empty. Unfortunately, robbery was beyond the stranger's intentions that night. Her actions prompted him to strike her with a blunt object. She hit the ground and was quickly ordered to stand back up. When she did, the attacker ordered her to run. Jean complied and went running for a nearby ditch, but the man redirected her and told her to run towards the road. Jean Larry initially thought that her boyfriend was dead, as the sound of the pistol hitting Jimmy's skull was so loud that she mistook it for a full-blown gunshot. Jean soon found an empty parked car, but this was as far as she'd go. The unknown man confronted her once again, very strangely asking her why she was running. Jean reminded him that he told her to do so, but she was called a liar. The man threw her to the ground and sexually assaulted her with his weapon, after which he fled on foot, giving Jean a chance to flee herself. She ran a half mile until she found a house, woke the residents, and had them call the police. Back at the site where the attack started, Jimmy Hollis regained consciousness and managed to flag down a nearby driver, who also called the police. He would be hospitalized for days to recover from multiple skull fractures. When the couple was questioned, they provided conflicting reports. Although both of them concluded the man was 6 feet tall and around 30 years old, Jean Larry claimed that she could see past the assailant's pillowcase mask, enough to identify him as a light-skinned black man. But Jimmy Hollis was certain that their attacker was a tan-skinned white man instead. Because of their starkly different conclusions, police began to especially suspect that Jean had actually known her attacker and protected his identity by calling him a black man. Larry was frustrated the authorities had even flirted with this possibility and said she planned to move away from Texarkana because of the ordeal. All in all, they had a bright flashlight in their faces, so identifying the masked man would be a difficult ordeal in the first place. Added atop their head trauma, there was really no definitive way to know, but whoever it was planned to strike again. It's the morning of Sunday, March 24th. A passing motorist spots a car 100 yards off of US Highway 67 West. It was a lover's lane. The unnamed person assumed that the couple inside may have slept there overnight, and upon closer inspection, made a gruesome discovery. Inside were the bodies of 29-year-old Richard Griffin and his girlfriend of 6 weeks, Polly Ann Moore. Richard was found in the car, shot twice in the back of the head. Polly was in the back seat, also shot in the head. And unlike the first case, there was some evidence recovered by authorities this time, a blanket and a single bullet casing. There was also a patch of blood-soaked ground just outside of the car, bringing forth the theory that Richard and Polly were murdered outside of the vehicle before being placed in it again. Congealed blood was also covering the car's running board, trickling from the bottom of the door. As for the blanket, it's possible that the assailant wrapped it around his firearm to be used as a sort of makeshift suppressor to muffle his weapon. With the help of the Texas Rangers and FBI, it was determined that the bullet casing came from a .32 caliber Colt automatic pistol. Polly Ann Moore was rumored to have also been sexually assaulted in this attack at the time, but others have denied this claim, leaving that detail a complete mystery. Police were eager to find this killer, working 24-hour shifts and even interviewing over 200 individuals for possible leads, offering a $500 reward. But unfortunately, this led to more than 100 false leads. Atop this already frustrating start, both Polly and Richard were laid to rest before any pathologist could examine their bodies. Why exactly that is completely unknown. Sunday, April 14th, 3 weeks later. The bodies of 17-year-old Paul Martin and 15-year-old Betty Jo Booker are found miles apart from one another. Martin's body discovered lying on the north edge of North Park Road around 6:30 a.m. He was shot 4 times with a .32 caliber automatic Colt pistol, just like in the first murder. One through the nose, back of the neck, in the right hand, and through the ribs. 2 miles away at 11:30, Betty Jo was found by a search party behind a tree with 2 bullet holes, one in her chest and the other in her face. Paul's car was located in Spring Lake Park with the keys still in the ignition. Much earlier that morning, around 1:30, Paul had picked up Betty from a Veteran of Foreign Affairs Club event where she was part of that night's musical arrangement on West 4th Oak Street. What exactly transpired in those horrifying moments shortly after are a bit of a mystery. But lead investigator, Texas Ranger Manuel T. Gonzalez, determined that both of them struggled with their attacker pretty intensely before being shot. Paul Martin's friends and family were questioned regarding whether or not the young man had any enemies, or knew anyone who had any reason to do something like this to him. There were none they knew of. The 5th and final murder officially connected to this phantom is something truly worthy of a horror movie. Since the incident involving Jimmy Hollis and Jean Larry, a first-hand account was provided by someone with an even more traumatic experience. Friday, May 3rd, 1946, 9 p.m. Nearly 10 miles northeast of Texarkana on the 500-acre farm property off Highway 67 East, Virgil Starks, 37, and wife Katie, 36, were lounging in their home. Katie was in a separate room, while Virgil sat in an armchair, reading a newspaper. Right behind Virgil was a closed double window. It's here where 2 gunshots rang out, the bullets violently breaking the glass and striking him in the back of the head. Hearing the noise, Katie immediately ran to its source, arriving early enough to catch Virgil react to what just happened. Her husband stood up briefly, before slumping back into his seat. Katie immediately realized what was happening and swiftly made an attempt for a crank telephone just nearby. She rang the police twice before unfortunately being shot in the face twice from the same window Virgil had been shot from. She fell to the floor but swiftly rose to her feet again, this time attempting to retrieve a pistol from a separate room. It was a failed effort, as the amount of blood streaming down her face blinded her vision. She heard the killer make his way to the rear end of the house, leaving her no choice but to flee as fast as she could through the front door and pray she'd be able to get enough distance from the madman. Bloody and barefoot, Katie Stark sprinted to the home of her brother and sister-in-law who lived nearby, but to her dismay, no one was home. With this, she had no other choice but to find a nearby neighbor, that neighbor being A.V. Prater. When he opened the door to her, a winded Katie simply uttered the words, "Virgil's dead," and collapsed on the spot. A.V. Prater wasted no time either. The man retrieved his rifle and fired it in the air to summon his neighbor, Elmer Taylor, in order for him to grab his car and help transport Katie to the hospital. Elmer, Prater, and Prater's family all accompanied her to Michael Meagher Hospital. Katie Starks thankfully made a full recovery despite the living hell she just survived. Sadly, just like the other cases, the Phantom of Texarkana was just as much of a mystery as he was before. When she was questioned by police, Stark said that she never laid eyes on the murderer since he was still shrouded by the darkness outside their window. And as an odd footnote, rumors amongst locals began circulating that her late husband, Virgil, had been hearing the sounds of a car patrolling near the house, insinuating that he'd been fearing retaliation from someone for an unknown reason. Katie shot these rumors down. As for the scene of the crime, the only piece of evidence possibly linked to the assailant was a black and red flashlight police recovered. This marked the official end of the Phantom's brutal spree, leaving a total of 8 attacks with 5 slain. For a 10-week period, Texarkana was subject to a brutal, faceless killer, whose mix of mystique and unstable motives haunted a series of communities seemingly out of random. Then, just suddenly, disappearing. Assuming it's true that absolutely none of these victims had a connection to the assailant, the movements of this person were completely random, targeting young couples at lovers' lanes because he knew where to look, or perhaps following them there. Either way, the Texarkana Moonlight murders were simply one of many lovers' lane killings that were prevalent in the mid-20th century. For whatever the motive, the killers seeking to isolate and carry out their heinous crime already had their prey secluded and unaware. In an effort to capture the mass killer, undercover police even utilized mannequins and cars to hopefully lure him in, but no luck. In the meantime, over 400 suspects were brought in for questioning over time, each of them cleared of suspicion. And with such a sudden wave of violence plaguing these counties, law enforcement enforced curfews with the public so on edge that people began locking their doors for the first time. Gun stores completely sold out of ammunition, screen doors were braced, and some even nailed sheets to cover windows of their own homes. In fact, the hysteria got so bad that people as far as Oklahoma City saw a spike in weapon sales. Whoever was responsible for the Moonlight murders was clearly outpacing the police, nor did he discriminate. However, rumors and speculation got so heated that authorities had to hold press conferences to remind the public that such talk hindered investigations. As if this weren't enough, Texarkana residents were so armed to the teeth that when police were called to an address, they had no choice but to announce themselves under the lights of their cars, just in case a civilian with an itchy trigger finger got too scared. In short, it was completely out of control. Vigilantism among locals also took hold during the murder spree. Two officers once approached a parked car in Arkansas while on patrol and approached a young couple in a car. They noticed the pair weren't alarmed in the least, but when made clear that they were police, the young woman in the car said, quote, "It's a good thing you told me who you are," and revealed that she trained a .25 caliber ACP pistol at him the whole time. There was even another incident where Texarkana City Police chased a suspicious car that was chasing a bus for 3 miles. It had gone on for so long that police had to shoot out the tires of the vehicle to make it stop. 2 local young men happened to be the culprits, and when questioned about tailing the bus, they told officers that they'd seen a man enter the bus from a private car and found him suspicious. Only reason they didn't stop for the cops was because their car was unmarked. With the public in a state of panic and seemingly countless amounts of people being questioned, determining any solid suspects was like finding a needle in a haystack. That was until Ewell Swinney came into the picture. Known as a car thief and counterfeiter, 29-year-old Swinney had been taken into custody due to his history as a thief and abandoned cars in the area, one being found near the scene of the Griffin Moore murder. Peggy Swinney, Ewell's wife, was also brought in for questioning, where she ended up implicating her husband in the murders, providing oddly specific details about the killings that were only known to police at the time. Atop that, she said that Ewell confessed to the crimes to her personally, but serious doubt began to set due to her story being inconsistent and constantly changing. Law enforcement worked to prove her confessions for 6 months, but in the end, Peggy recanted her confession and refused to testify against her husband. Ewell Swinney was put behind bars as a habitual offender for the car thefts, but never charged for the murders. There was another suspect that made himself known 2 years later in 1948, when a suicide note left by 18-year-old Henry Duty Tennyson claimed to confess to 3 of the Phantom's murders, including the Booker, Martin, and Starks killings. Henry played trombone at the same high school that victim Betty Jo Booker attended, but they didn't know each other. The note he left behind expressed deep remorse for the murders and pain he placed upon the families. But the belief in these claims dwindled, as friend of Henry, James Freeman, said that both were playing cards during the night of the Starks murder, and he was soon ruled out as a suspect. There was no solid evidence to prove Tennyson's claims, and it's generally believed that he suffered from mental instability. Then there was Ralph Bauman, an ex-machine gunner with the Army Air Force. For several weeks leading up to the Starks murder, he found himself waking up in a fugue state with his rifle conveniently missing. Becoming paranoid about this, as well as hearing that a suspect description sounded seemingly close to his own, Bauman hitchhiked all the way to Los Angeles, fully convinced that he'd committed these murders. During his time in LA, Ralph approached the LAPD to express that he thought he was the Phantom everyone was looking for. He was arrested and questioned, but nothing about his story added up. Although he confessed to killing 3 people in Texarkana, the dates in which he said he did not match with any of the Phantom murders. In fact, it was learned that he had been discharged from the AAF for psychoneurosis. Ralph Bauman was ruled out, just like so many others. Amongst these 3 suspects, a handful of others were highlighted and investigated for potential connections with the murders, but none of them proved enough for a charge. And since 1946, the Texarkana Moonlight murders continue to remain unsolved. The case never officially closed. 5 killed, others wounded. A .32 caliber pistol and a .22 caliber rifle did the deed. First-hand accounts and a mysterious flashlight seemed to be the closest investigators had gotten to the Phantom, and unfortunately, it remains that way. As we approach nearly 80 years since this disturbing string of killings, one can't help but wonder if we'll ever get to the bottom of the mask-wearing maniac who wrought so much fear and devastation to Texarkana. Constant advancements in forensic DNA technology has given hope to cases even as old as Jack the Ripper. But what truly matters in these older cases is the preservation of original evidence. But sadly, it's highly unlikely. And if we're lucky enough to have such evidence on hand, there's also a high probability of contamination, depending on how well it was handled through the decades. It goes without saying that it's widely accepted that the Phantom of Texarkana has gone down in history as one of the many unidentified killers throughout American history. One can only hope that some way, somehow, the families of these victims can finally get answers.